here. Today we're going to be talking about how can men and women work together in healthy ways. It's possible. If you want to dig more into like how can a woman thrive in a more male context, there's another workshop that I'll be giving tomorrow. That we're going to go dig more into like the challenges. But today we're going to be looking more specifically working between men and women together.
Yeah, and so we want to start off by just acknowledging it's a tricky conversation, and there's a lot of challenges that go into how do we work together, male and female, in the context of a church setting. And perhaps maybe one of the more difficult things off the top is just, what is complementarianism, right? I mean, the idea of it's tricky just right off the beginning. There we go. Sometimes we're not even having the same conversation and we don't realize it. Like, what is the role that the male at work is supposed to play and the woman at work is supposed to play, and how do we make sure that we're coming across? And I think what makes it hard is just the definition of complementarianism and egalitarianism, and how broad those definitions can be, and the fact that we could be thinking that we're using the same term but mean very different things. And so just in that alone, right off the top, we know that it's a difficult conversation to have.
So, just so we're speaking all the same language, we have this idea of egalitarianism. They're equal in value, men and women, and they can have the same roles. And in the complementarianism section, men and women are equal in value, but there are differences in roles based on the gender, especially in positions of leadership in the church or in marriage. And TGC is more typically complementarianism. We're both from complementarianism context, actually the same church association.
Yeah.
And it's a spectrum. It's just this idea that it is a spectrum, and we could have in the spectrum the more hard comp, soft egal, and hard egal. People are more rigid in their extreme understanding of it, or a bit more nuanced. And even amidst that, you could have, in our church association, we see people who land at different places. And sometimes their church might land there, but they might be there. And sometimes in their marriage, they might be more there, but in their church understanding, there might be different places on the spectrum. So it's just to be aware that there are nuances. You might might find yourself in different places on the spectrum. And we want to be careful about mislabeling people. Sometimes the hard comps would tend to label someone who's more here as an egalitarian. It's not exactly the same. So just being aware that the spectrum does exist. Let's be careful to not label anyone as a heretic. This is not like tier 1 issue on the salvation. This is how we're working out our church life. And just being careful not to use labels as weapons too, about positions we don't understand necessarily well. It's something that's very important for us as we dig into the conversation. But we're going to be focusing more how in this context, men and women can work together in healthy ways.
Yeah, but it's more than just kind of that conversation. There's a bunch of other challenges that come to us when it comes to working together. And the big one is that sin gets in the way, right? And that's an important part of this conversation is, unfortunately, historically and day to day, there's a history of sin, something that we have to be aware of when it comes to working together, and something that has really colored a lot of the conversation and makes it difficult to figure out how do we work together. A big thing that comes out of this is just the suspicion and fear that is existing in these conversations. The suspicion of two people working together, opposite genders, what's going on? Is that okay? All of the different looks and things that you're aware of and your mind is filtering through are something that just can get, if we let it, can get in the way, create a wedge between us being able to fulfill the biblical command to work together. And then in addition to that, there's all the fear, right? A lot of the decisions, a lot of the things that we do are coming out of fear of accusations, fear of whatever it is. And so our sin gets in the way of us working together, and sometimes that leads us to maybe putting up barriers that don't need to be there and being overly cautious, which, if I'm honest, affects you in the room more than it does me. Because if there's barriers and an overcautious attitude coming through, I'm going to be able to do all the things in ministry that I want to do, and likely the unfortunate sinful side of this is the women in my ministry are going to be left out. And so we want to make sure that we're not being overly cautious or letting that sin dictate the conversation, but making sure that we're approaching this thing and saying, we know that there's stuff we need to be aware of, we know that there are precautions we want to take, but we want to make sure that we are allowing men and women to work together because that's what we're called to do. From the man's perspective, sometimes it's honestly, sometimes it's just a pride thing. Maybe we're worried about the spectrum that we showed earlier and saying, well, if I give a woman too much opportunity, someone's going to say I'm a heretic or an egalitarian, right? And I want to protect my reputation when it comes to my biblical work. And sometimes it's just, I want to make sure I'm acting above reproach, which is a good thing to do, but allowing that to dictate rather than saying, what's the biblical approach to how we're going to work together?
And from a woman's perspective, often there's just this frustration that can happen and suspicion of like, that's it, they're all against me all the time. And I'm thinking of a story of once with a male mentor who was visiting different churches, and I was working with him, and I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to be able to just, come alongside with you and see what you're doing working in the different churches and explore, and I have things to learn from you. And being told, well, no, it would be too complicated bringing you along, because then we'd have to think of another accommodation for you because we couldn't stay at the same hotel. And I was just like, okay, so it's just so much easier for the guys, but you're suspicious that I, as a woman, I could cause some problems to your reputation or cause you to stumble. Like, it's unfortunate, and we understood that he was like a father figure to me practically, but like, we want to respect and be careful, and we want to be careful of women's safety as well, and with the whole Me Too movement is so important. But sometimes it creates a space where the men don't want to take certain risks, and then who gets penalized, and it can create a certain frustration in the women's side.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that we put healthy safeguards in place, but in that, when it comes to working together in ministry, we want to make sure that we're willing to find solutions that work, right? So in that case, that's something where if you value women and the role of women in your ministry and you want to work together, then you find a solution to both go on a trip like that, right? Too often it's, okay, me and the guys, we're going to go do this thing, and there's not a lot of opportunities that are the same for the women around. Whereas we could say, let's look around the church that we're going to go visit and see if anybody's willing to host people, and then we can bring the men and the women. Let's find proper ways to travel together. There's ways that if we actually want to take this seriously, that we can be creative and find solutions to allow the men and women to work together, and then make sure that we're not missing out on these opportunities that come up. And I think one of the biggest things, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and one of the things I heard that I loved was, let's make sure we're not overusing the Billy Graham rule. And to remember that Billy Graham rule that existed was, for a guy who had a traveling ministry, right? So he traveled across the nation and then internationally. And so his rule was he never wanted to be alone with a woman when he was doing those things. He didn't want to eat with a woman in a restaurant. He didn't want to travel with a woman, didn't want to stay with a woman, which those make sense. But the thing that we often miss when we apply that to our church context is, I'm not traveling around the nation, I'm actually in one flock. And so I have to be able to shepherd women. And so I need to find the appropriate ways where I could meet with a woman one-on-one if she needs to have some pastoral counseling or needs to come and talk to me about something maybe going on with her husband or whatever it is. I might need to travel with somebody that I know and I work with and I trust to go to an event and figure out the right ways to do that. And so to take an international traveling rule or a national traveling rule to a guy who's going to places where there's no accountability for him, and then plugging that into a church context actually doesn't work. So you got to find different ways to make sure that you're setting up the right safeguards, but not to the point where you're removing any opportunity to work together. It's still me. So then I mentioned pride before, but the other issue with pride that we have to talk about is not just our reputation, but the fact that when we work together, men need to make sure that we're not being overly harsh, overly dismissive, and that we're able to have constructive conversations, that we're able to take feedback, that we're willing to meet at the table and say, how is this working? How can we work and do this together? And learn how to be shepherds, not just of one half of your church, and this will come up a few times today, but of your whole church.
And I tend to remind us that suspicion, pride, women too, we have our part to play in that. It's not always, it's the men are so proud, and they dismiss us as if we're not worthy, or they're just suspicious, but we have our own part to play. This is a sin problem that we all struggle with. But there's hope. So we're going to look now into what are some of the challenges of working together, just to be able to name things. And then after that, we'll look into some of the consequences of not working together.
Yeah, I mean, so the big one off the bat is that men and women are different. Like, we were created different. We have different perspectives, and we're just different. And so we need to figure out how we work together. We are created differently, and we don't want to lean too far into stereotypes, and understand that every single person is unique and has their own way of working that we need to address. But in general, it's true that God created male and women, male and female differently. And so when it comes to working together, we're approaching things differently sometimes, which actually is a strength, but it creates a challenge where we have to learn how to communicate together. If you took a group of guys and put them in one room, and took a group of girls and put them in another room, the conversations are going to be different. If you give them the same problem to solve, the solutions are going to be different. The approaches are going to be different. And again, all of that is good, but it means that when we come and work together, we need to make sure that we're not stuck in the way that I think is the right way, and you're thinking the way that you think is the right way, but to understand we're coming from two different sides, and are called by God to work together to bring those sides together. And so we need to make sure that we can be heard, and that we're listening to the other people, and that they're heard as well. And then just on top of that, like the different experiences that we have in society, the different experiences we have in life, in church, and family, all shape us in the way we think and how we approach ministry, right? The experiences that I have as a male are going to be incredibly different than the females that I work with, and their experience of trying to be a part of ministering in a church that has male and female in it.
I think of an example with some of the men I'm working with my own church, where I'm in charge of matching up small accountability groups with women, and there's a guy who's responsible for matching up smaller accountability groups among men. And then we were updating each other of like our vision and stuff, and then he was saying, when I check in with the guy leaders and they don't have much to say, and I send them a survey, and then I get more information, because when I meet up with them, it's like, how are you doing? They're like, good. But I was like, wow, when I meet up with one of the women leaders, like we have like a 3-hour conversation. And like 2 hours is just, how are you doing? I don't care about your ministry right now. I just want to see, how are you doing? Let's talk it through. Let's cry. It's fine. And then 2 hours later, okay, yeah, and how's your ministry? And it's like, wow, we're just so different, and it's okay. Our meetings are different, and we women tend sometimes, again, you don't want to get into stereotypes, but sometimes we just have this capacity to dive deep very fast. And our meetings can take up twice the time. And some of the trainings I received for coaching or mentoring is like, yeah, try to aim for a 30-minute meeting. And I'm like, 30 minutes? Like, I can't do that. And it's okay, we're different. And just naming these differences, we have different perspectives, it's important, and it's all right.
Yeah.
And I think there's also this idea that we need to translate a lot. Like, we're different brains, and sometimes we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the other, of how they're going to understand. And if I want to be efficient and get my point across, I have to translate in a language that they can understand. And it requires work, and that's why it is a challenge to work together. And it's true that some ministries are more geared towards one type of person because they're organized by, say, men, or organized by women. And it's important to have these two voices that balance out together. Idea we need to work together. And it requires maturity, it requires love, and it is challenging. I remember one of my pastors was like saying to me, okay, you're gonna have to give a little report to the elders team. He says, now you gotta think like a guy. You have to be, sorry sister, but you have to think like a guy. You have to be concise. You can't go babbling on for an hour. You have 15 minutes. So, focus and be very concise and to the point, and say what you see as a problem, say what you need, and then I did that. I worked hard to prepare it. It took a lot of time. Tack, 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 and then they're like, okay, fine, makes sense. I was like, okay, wow, I have to think like a guy. But it requires work. It requires effort. It's not necessarily always easy.
Yeah, I mean, you have to learn how to talk to each other and hear each other. And I think that the difference is, we could probably all think of examples in our churches of, if you had a room full of guys, what they would do versus a room full of girls, what they would do. One of the examples I've seen in our church is even just in announcements, right? Like, imagine that there's a large church announcement or a shakeup in the staff, right? Somebody has moved on to another role or something like that, and the elders have created the communication for that, and they get up and they just state all the facts and they move on. And then I would hear from the women in the church being like, if a woman wrote that announcement, like that person would have been thanked, and it's just like cold and with no heart. And that's exactly why we need to work together and get feedback from a wide range of people, because it's male, female, and all kinds of other things that are going to shape our perspectives. And the more feedback, the more we work together, the better, more holistically we're going to work as a church.
So it is challenging. Working together is challenging. And some people could just want to give up, say, forget it. But we do believe that there are also consequences of not working together. Not working together might actually be worse. So, for example, I think we miss out on potential, on shepherding opportunities, on growth. I think half of the church, or most churches, more than half of the church, are women. And if we're not helping these women thrive in their gifts, working alongside with the men, we're missing on a huge gap of potential of ministry that's being wasted. And we're missing on opportunities of shepherding, caring for the flock, a good portion of the flock as well, listening to them, making sure that they're feeling heard as well.
Yeah, and I think as the men in a church, again, we're called to shepherd the whole church. And so we need to make sure that we're listening and caring for the women in our church. And if we take the approach of the way that I'm going to shepherd the women in the church is I'm going to ask their husbands how their family's doing, we're losing that opportunity to shepherd those women. And most importantly, I'm losing an opportunity to learn from someone who has a different perspective than me, who can probably teach me a few things about shepherding if we just kind of focus on the one side that we're called to. And the whole church is going to suffer because we're not benefiting from everyone's gifting. We know in Scripture that every single believer is gifted and equipped in order to help the church and bring glory to God. And so if we're not working together, then we're missing the fact that there's a whole group of people, probably more than half of my church, who's not using their gifts because we're not providing an opportunity. And so we're missing out of that. And then just, again, a lack of healthy communication. And I remember having a conversation with a woman in our church once who was like, make sure you always ask the wife separately. Because if you're asking the husband, you're going to miss a whole lot of stuff that you're going to wish you caught. And we just need to make sure that there's that communication happening. And so we need to understand that there are a lot of challenges when it comes to working together, male and female. A lot of things we have to overcome, a lot of precautions that we have to take. But when you look at what happens when you don't work together, there are just so many consequences, let alone the fact that we're not fulfilling what God called us to do. And so we want to encourage you to keep at it.
So just remember that this not working together, choosing this path because this one's too hard, it's not God's plan for his church. His plan is something so much deeper, so much better, and we would summarize it with, yes, working together is hard, but not working together is worse. And yeah, it requires effort, but not doing it would be unbiblical. We believe that God created man and woman to complement each other, and it does require effort, but we want to be biblical. So let's dive in, because working together is good. It's beautiful. It's God's original intent. We're going to talk about some of the solutions in the application section, but now after looking at the challenges, we're going to take a time to see a bit more of the theology. What does the Bible have to say about men and women working together? What's his intent? So that everything we say is grounded in Scripture, because obviously that's the ultimate
Gospel
authority.
coalition, right?
Yeah. So why is working together important? What does the Bible say?
Yeah, I mean, so we just start off right at the beginning, right? Right at the beginning of creation, Genesis 2, 18 to 23, where you have Adam and Eve, the account of Eve being created. And the whole idea here is that guys can't do it alone. Like, Scripture is very clear. The first thing that God says is not good is the fact that a man was alone, right? And that God created Eve because without Eve, we couldn't do it. We need both. We're created to complement, and God created male and female to do the work that he called humanity to do. So we need to understand that women were created to help rule and help with God's created command to rule over all of his creation. this is not to say that woman was better than man and she came in and fixed everything, but we see in Scripture, sometimes it feels that way, we see in Scripture that we work together and God created us to work together. So anything outside of this, as Elisabeth said before, goes outside of God's intended order. They were created to work together. Woman needs man, man needs woman. And then we see in 1 Corinthians 11 to 12, and I left my Bible over here. I'm going to grab it. Again, we see this play out. Do you have it off the top of your head? Oh, I thought you were like, it's right here. That would have been awesome. Okay, 1 Corinthians 11. Next time, you'll have it. I had it out and then I put it away. 11 to 12. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman, but everything comes from God. And so you see Old Testament, New Testament, that order that God created male and female to work together is just prevalent throughout Scripture, which we're going to show you as we go. This is my favorite part of the presentation as we go through this.
Let's see more examples in the Bible of men and women actually working together well, and how amazing it was. So, because we've seen the brokenness that's happened at the origin, but we've seen also how there's some redemption. Okay. So first, next one that comes up in Scripture, we see Miriam and her two brothers, Moses and Aaron, working together. I love what Micah 6:4 says, an obscure passage in one of the prophets, naming the leaders of Israel. I have sent before you as leaders Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. She's mentioned as one of them who contributes to leading the people of Israel. And she didn't need to be mentioned, but she is mentioned and is an important player in the people of Israel's story. There's also Deborah, Barak. He didn't want to go to war without her. And God used her as a judge, a female judge. Men and women working together to help the people of Israel in their time of need. We were mentioned this morning in the messages with, I think it was with Taylor, how Huldah, God used her with Josiah's men. He sent his secretary, he sent the priest to go visit her and get information. What does the Lord have to say in our situation? And she lived at the same time as Jeremiah. I mean, he could have easily sent his men to Jeremiah, but for some reason he chose to send them to her, and they worked together for the good of the people of God. I think of Esther and Mordecai. They each had their part to play in saving the people of God. She's well known, but she couldn't have done what she did without Mordecai's help. And he definitely could not have done what she did. He didn't win the king's heart like she did. I think of Jesus and the women around him, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, and many other female disciples of Jesus mentioned in Luke 8. We know many of them. They were following him, and they were important. Without their financial support and their presence, the ministry of Jesus wouldn't have been the same. He let them help him. I mean, this is God. He didn't need humans' help, especially not a woman's help or a man's help, but he chose. And he chose to let women come and help him. And Scripture lists their names. And we think of some of Paul's female collaborators, co-workers, Lydia, Phoebe. Phoebe was mentioned in Romans 16 as sent as a deaconess of the church there, and probably the one who carried the letter of Romans, this best representation of the gospel that we find pretty much in the Bible. It just explains it so deeply, and she is probably the one who carried it. She's mentioned as a co-worker who's important. There's also, did we skip? There's Priscilla and Aquila, but Priscilla worked with Paul as well. Her name is mentioned. She didn't need to be mentioned, but Scriptures give her that value, mentioning her as an important co-worker with Paul. And it's just remembering that these examples that we see, this whole list of women who are mentioned in Scripture, working alongside men in healthy ways, these are not anomalies, but they're actually signs of God's design at work. God is at work, and he has used men and women working together. We have examples in Scriptures. That's the model we were called to follow.
I think so. We provided a lot of the biblical examples there, and there are more. But also the other thing we wanted to look at is just spiritual gifts. The fact that, again, God is gifting his people and equipping them to do the work that he's called them to. And so we have here a list, Elisabeth put this together, it's great, of the spiritual gifts that you find in Scripture. You know, Romans, 1 Corinthians, Ephesians. And one of the things that you'll notice as you look through this list is none of them are specified to be given strictly to men, right? They're to the believers, they're to the church, they're to the people of God, which means unless we're going to do some weird biblical interpretation, we need to see these as being available to male and female. And if they're given to male and female, then we can't exclude the women from using them.
We still have to mention specifically about teaching and leadership. Those are two gifts that are mentioned that there is a lot of debate in the complementarian churches. All of these gifts don't pose a problem except possibly these two. And in teaching, like most complementarian churches won't necessarily have a woman preaching on Sundays. And leadership, there's some churches that might have deacons and deaconesses and other leadership roles, but the pastor's role is often limited. So this might look differently on the spectrum and various churches. And you have to have these conversations with your elders about how to use your gifts in ways that are healthy. What if you do have a teaching gift? Okay, well, what are the opportunities that are available for you to use your gift? Because God gave you that gift, and it's important for you to be able to use it for the well-being of the church. So the question shouldn't be as much if a woman can teach or not, but actually what avenues are open for this woman to use her gifts, not exclude her completely. And I think also just the whole mentoring we see in Titus 2 verses 1 to 5, where older men are called to teach the younger men, and women are called to teach the younger women. And women, they have a place to play in helping the next generation. And we need to know, as a church, who is teaching who. It's important for the elders as well to know who is teaching the next generation in their churches and to be able to do it well together. So these conversations need to be had in our churches, even if they might have some level of limitations on how it's exercised, but what avenues are open and who's doing what so we can do this together.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as churches, it's going to happen naturally. The younger women are going to go to the older women, younger men are going to go to the older men, and so we better equip them to teach, right? But ultimately what this comes down to, this is something I learned and I heard my lead pastor for a long time say, if someone's given a spiritual gift, it's sinful to not let them use it. So I really like what Elisabeth said in terms of it's not do you teach or don't you teach, but what's the appropriate place for you to teach? And as a church, we need to provide that. What's the appropriate way for you to use your gift of leadership? How can we set those places up? And so now we're going to move into the place where we're going to talk about some application. We have some ideas. We're going to allow for some questions after and let you kind of shape where we're going to go. But what does working together in ministry look like in a healthy way? So the first thing that we see is we want to pray. We want to pray for each other, right? I want to get the prayer requests from the women in our church. I want to be able to be prayed for by women in the church. We want to not create those boundaries that are so stringent that we're not even praying for each other, but also provide opportunities to pray with each other, have opportunities to meet together in these groups where we're all as a church family praying together for each other. And one of the cool things about when you pray for other people, it's really hard to stay bitter and angry at them. And so it actually, not only are we praying for each other, but through that prayer, we have this avenue that brings us together and brings that forgiveness and grace and that love together. And make sure that we're finding the right things to pray for. We want to pray for unity. We want to pray for women and men as they lead their ministries and know what's going on in each other's ministries. So one of the first things that we want to do if we're going to work together is find ways to appropriately pray for each other and with each other.
That's where we have to start. But we think there's still more that we can do as well. And one of the big pieces is building trust. It doesn't happen on its own. It doesn't happen automatically. It needs intention. It needs effort. And there are ways we can build trust. We'll explore a few. First is just to define things. often lack of communication or miscommunication, misunderstanding creates a lot of problems. Taking the time to define a few things helps to build trust because we know we're talking about the same things. So defining roles. Okay, so if our church is here on the spectrum, what does that look like for these different roles that we can play? What are the expectations that we might have? What are boundaries that must be put into place? Okay, there's a healthy place for boundaries. It's super important. But are there some outdated versions of boundaries? And maybe some more modern things we need to be thinking about? I mean, we're no longer back in the day where we have to only think about men and women being maybe stumbling blocks for each other. We're in a whole new era where we can't only focus on men and women boundaries and forget that we might need women boundaries and men boundaries nowadays in the LGBTQ era. Things are different, and we need to be thinking across the board, and that comes down to how we trust one another. Setting these boundaries clearly, it's useful, it's helpful, but we have to define them. They won't define themselves on their own.
We want to make sure that we're finding ways to create accountability as needed. So another example of kind of that idea of going on those trips together, one of the things our church has done is we'll just bring more people. So rather than 2 people going on a trip, we had a conference in Barrie that we wanted to stay over at, and so we invited 4 of our women from different leadership areas in our church, got them their own place to stay, and then a group of the guys went and we just met together. We had lunch together, but we created that accountability that's there. In addition to that, I mean, find opportunities to send the women. I mean, you guys don't get to maybe advocate for this. There should be opportunities to send the women to events to learn and train and be equipped, not just for the men. Change it, do something different, find another event if it doesn't work. Just do different arrangements, make an effort, and try to make sure that everybody gets to go in and find those ways to build trust on those events that you want to do.
Another area where we can build trust is just understanding. After you've defined things, but do you really want to understand what the other person's going through? We have all the things we want to say to the other person, but let's start by trying to understand. And it goes both ways. When we expect always that the other person would understand us, well, let's start and give the example and try to understand the other. So a few things that come to mind. Listen. We have to give each other that chance to talk and share what's on their mind. When we assume things, we think we know what the other person believes and stands for. We don't even give them that chance. It's not fair. So doing a first step, and sometimes it can feel annoying as a woman because it's like, well, haven't we had enough time of being there for them? Can't they be there for us at times? Well, let's keep following our Savior's example and taking initiative and listening and trying to understand. Maybe communication might be difficult, and we might need to have a mediator who plays a role to help us understand each other, and that's okay. But seeking to understand first is important. I also find it's very important to have this posture of curiosity. Just, again, being careful of assumptions we might have. I think I understand exactly what you're thinking and I'm upset about it. Well, let's be curious first. What do you mean by that? I want to understand where you're coming from. Elders, where are we at in the church on this issue? I want to understand curiously. I'm sincere. I want to understand.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be aware of those assumptions and a lot of the assumptions that men can be making, and to really kind of approach the opposite person from a place of giving them kind of the benefit of the doubt rather than assuming they're doing things maliciously. So from the male side of running things, men are often going to assume that they're doing things the right way. They're going to assume, we went through a biblical context, we think we're doing things according to Scripture, we assume we're doing things the right way. We're not intentionally, hopefully, if they are intentionally, there's a big problem here. We're not intentionally excluding someone, we're not intentionally doing the things we're doing because we don't care, but we assume, because no one has told us otherwise, that we're doing the right thing, right? And that's why the voice of women in our churches become incredibly important. We assume we're caring properly. I mentioned before, but a lot of churches will have their male elders check in with the male person of the family and assume that's good enough. And they're not trying to be oblivious and not know what's going on, but they're assuming they're caring for that family because they've checked in on the family. And it helps when a woman is able to feel safe enough to come and talk to us and say, I know you're trying and you think you're doing the right thing, but can I give you my perspective? But that comes from someone not assuming I'm doing the wrong thing and being angry at me, but saying, hey, let me fill in some stuff here.
So as women, I think it's good to remember also to not assume and to just believe that men are probably trying more than we think. Just to do things as best as they can.
We are!
They are! They're not trying to do things wrong. They just might not always know how, and we need to talk about these things. And it might not be intentional to be hurtful in some situations. It might just be a blind spot. And let's not assume these things. So this posture of curiosity, of asking questions, giving the other person a chance to clarify, is this what you meant? This is what I understood. Is that what you really meant? Just checking in. And just in general, I think people, men or women, we respond better to humility, to people being open, and then being accused of they probably have bad intentions. We usually respond better to people giving us the benefit of the doubt and wanting to understand.
And then I think we want to make sure that we're looking at each other as individuals. And if we're going to work together, we need to understand this. Male, female is one thing to go through, but we really want to work on understanding each other, right? So as a staff or as a team or whatever you're working with, your group of people that you're working with, you want to take time to get to know each other. You want to identify everyone's strengths, their weaknesses, how do they work in certain contexts, and how do we work together. We want to understand that God has gifted each person and called them to specific roles, given them specific giftings. How do we figure out how we all complement each other and understand each other, and the frustrations that you have at work that I don't look at because they're just natural to me, and the areas that we can fill in for each other, and how do we take that beyond just gender, but also just to go into all the other differences that go there and celebrate who we are together on this team.
Third thing, at some point, after defining, understanding, yes, there is a time and place to communicate. There is a time and place to say what's on your heart, if there's been hurt or misunderstandings, to clarify. But there's a few pointers we want to encourage us. First, being kind. Sometimes we think when we're, the men are rational and they can handle anything and we can just criticize them. And I mean, they're humans, they have feelings too, and as human beings,
just way down there.
Deep down. And again, humans just generally respond better to encouragement than to criticism. Women and men. So sometimes, they might not always respond well, but sometimes it's not as much because the woman, what she had to say was off, but just her tone, her approach. She was harsh, she was critical, she was not understanding. And that's a shame. I've seen that happen, where I've had women share with me, like, oh yeah, I told the elders all of this, and everything she said was like, you got a good point. But her approach just comes in and like angry, and it's like, you're not helping you, and you're not helping the cause for all of us.
Yeah.
I think a kind approach is it's better. It's the way that reflects Christ. His own heart, he had kindness in his approach.
Yeah, and on both sides, right? We all need to be aware that we need to come in and kind. But the next thing we need to do is make sure that we're honest. We don't want to let that kindness get in the way of actually delivering the message that needs to be delivered. And so we want to be honest about what's going on. Sometimes we have to have hard conversations and really get to the root of some of the issues that are going on. So we want to speak kindly, but also be honest and make sure that everyone's aware of what's going on. If there's a hurt or an oversight that's happening, make sure we're clearly making that known. It's not helpful if we're kind and we just kind of ignore it or let it keep going on. We want to be kind and honest.
Third thing is be clear. Sometimes we I don't know for you, but as a woman, I'm just used to walking on eggshells to make sure that I'm understood, and I'm just not as clear as I could be, straight to the point, because I don't want to create a scene, I don't want to create an explosion. And I've just learned with time, as working with men, that it's not helpful if I'm not clear about what I mean, what I want to say. And I have to be sometimes quite explicit and just get to the point, get straight up. and they usually respond better than I think they would. And if it's not clear in my mind, I can't expect it to be clear in theirs either, and expect that they can read between the lines. I remember talking with one of my pastors about something, and it wasn't fully defined in my mind, but I was just, I think out loud. So I just wanted to debrief stuff with him, and I could see he just didn't get it, just moved on to the next topic. I was like, oh, and I felt hurt. I was like, but it's not his fault. It wasn't clear in my mind, it couldn't be clear in his. I had to do my homework beforehand, knowing what did I want to say, what am I asking him, what do I need as information. And yeah, being clear is a way of being kind too. Another point is concision. As a woman, and I don't think it applies to all women, but I know of quite a few, we're able to talk a lot, and get to the point is not always easy. And when my pastor told me, oh, you have to, give your little report to the elders, and you have 15 minutes and think like a man, he didn't mean it in a mean way. It's just in terms of being efficient. And he gave me this quote by Winston Churchill, which I found interesting. He was saying, Winston Churchill, when he had to prepare like a 15-minute talk, he would spend like an hour or two preparing it. But when he had to prepare a 5-minute talk, it would take him 5 hours preparing it. Because he had to be concise. It's a whole lot more work, you have to put in the time to prepare. But I found that it often is helpful when I come up to the men in my life, when I have something to say. It doesn't have to always be about hurt, but anything, and just being clear to the point. And I have to prepare in advance, but usually it turns out like a fluid conversation, and it's easier to communicate when we're clear in our minds and to the point.
Yeah, and I think the last thing just on that, and I do want to go quickly on this one just for the sake of time, but we want to make sure we're communicating regularly. So one of the things that we do, actually, we just hired a new office manager, and she created a lunch desk. And so we're going to try to have lunches together as a staff, or just stop by each other's desks. But that's a big thing in terms of building trust, is just spend time together, talk with each other as much as you can.
So, define, understand, communicate, and the last one we would say for building trust is just enjoy. Sincerely enjoy one another, build friendships. God has placed us together on a team. So figure it out. How does that work out? And God has given gifts to men, and he has given gifts to women, and they're to be enjoyed and to the profit and the good of the church. Enjoy the gifts of the men around you. Tell the men around you, hey, that's great. And sometimes we'll tell someone else, oh, wasn't that a great sermon? And sometimes someone will tell me, oh, I really love that sermon. I was like, oh, did you go tell him? Oh, no. I'm not the one who needs to hear it. He needs to hear it. And he needs to be encouraged in his good work. And we have to enjoy each other's gifts and tell each other how much we enjoy it. And letting each other know that we're on each other's side. Thanking one another for our hard work. And Jennifer, with who I'm going to be giving the other workshop, she says, I found it so interesting, she says, when a woman in my church is angry about one of the men or the elders, I tell them, okay, first, before we get into that, write down 50 things that they've done well. Like 50 things, that's a lot. Let's start with 10. But if we can't name a few of the good things that these brothers have done, maybe our heart posture is not completely right. It doesn't mean that there's not ever cases where we might have done things completely wrong and we might need to be corrected on that. But generally, if your heart is bitter or it's broken, it's not the time to criticize. It's a time to also stop and process it with the Lord, be thankful for the good shots. And I mean, if the elders are not qualified, that's a whole other issue.
Yeah. It's a bigger issue than this shop.
Yeah, and that's a church issue.
Yeah.
It's bigger. It's not a woman's issue. But when we are grateful, let's say it, and it really changes our heart posture. So build friendships, enjoy their gifts, thank them.
And just the last thing.
And then, beyond prayer, building trust. Oh, we're skipping that.
We'll skip on it. We do want to make sure that one of the things we're doing is modeling those healthy relationships and healthy dynamics for our churches and for the young ones in our churches so they grow up and know how to do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But for the sake of, we want to answer your questions.
Yeah.
Go to the last one.
The fourth point would be advocate. So there is room for fighting for opportunities for women in our churches. and gently nudging along biblically for these opportunities and doing it for one another. Not always waiting for others to do it for us, but let's lead and, look for opportunities for other women to serve in their capacities together with the men, and encouraging, and sometimes just pointing out to the men around us, well, have you thought of a woman who could do this? And having someone else advocate is a big deal. And yes, there might be times where we might have to advocate for ourselves, and we were looking for opportunities for resources, but we can also be doing that for others around us.
And I think for the men in churches, we want to make sure that we're asking the men in our churches to provide opportunities to use their gifting, opportunities for women to serve. One of the things we talked about as we were prepping for this can't be the only place that this conversation happens. There's a whole nother TGC conference where this conversation needs to happen, and a whole other audience that needs to hear it. And so that's one of the things that we'll be talking about kind of behind the scenes. But we need to make sure that our churches are finding those solutions and making sure there's lots of opportunity for women to work alongside men and for women to use the gifts, and make sure that the church is speaking up and advocating for those leaders as well.
So there you go, 4 fronts you can focus on practically. Will you get to it all perfectly? No, but it's first steps, right? Learning to build trust with the people around you, modeling healthy relationships in your own life, in front of the next generation, your children, the young people who are watching you, and advocating when you can. But I'll insist again on the first one. Start and always keep prayer in mind. Prayer is the thing that changes the world. God is alive and he answers prayer. And praying together is healing. Praying for one another brings a lot of healing. And the Lord is full of surprises. He can open doors that we can't imagine. So giving it to him before anything. Even before sharing it among other people, our frustrations, bring it to the Lord. Processing it through prayer is so important. So that's what we had to share with you. And now is a question time. I don't know how much time we have left for questions. Liz, do we know how much time we have?
Yes, so we have 10 minutes.
10 minutes, perfect. Any questions? Yes.
Not really asking for myself, but any question I have. If you're a woman who believes you have, like, particularly gifts of leadership or teaching, and your church doesn't, like, affirm that, you talked about, like, the advocacy point. Would that be a valid reason to go and find another church?
I'm not answering first.
I guess, I know there's a lot of nuance with it too, it's like, you can talk to the elders, and I don't know, what's your relationship also to the church, but.
Yeah, well, there might be many reasons why you might want to stay in that church too. Keep in mind.
Yeah.
Many good reasons, valid reasons for family, for, but I think it's starting with that healthy conversation of like, okay, I want to be respectful about, where we stand on the spectrum. Maybe as an individual member, I might have different opinions, and that's okay. But if biblically there is room, like for me to serve my gifts, what does that look like? As an elder, please open me the doors. And then there's that area of trusting the Lord. Now, the other workshop I'm giving with Jennifer, we're going to be digging more into that as well. But I think it's case by case. It's hard to tell. If there's other factors, if the fact that you can't serve according to your gifts for some reason is an indicator of maybe other problems, that might be the real reason why you might want to change church. But surprisingly, I think there's a lot of opportunities that we don't always think of, and we're just frustrated because we wanted that opportunity. And there's leading humbly and servant leadership too, which is a whole other topic. But I would be cautious to give like a one quick answer that covers all situations, because it's a bit of a case by case situation. But what would you say?
Yeah, I think I would have a few conversations
Yeah.
first, and I would even do things like the woman who's leading our women's ministry right now will send me podcasts to listen to about women and men working together, or women leading different things, and they're all from TGC sources. So if you're here, I'm guessing your church is okay with TGC, probably. I don't know, but I think there's room to say, hey, can I send you this to listen to, and then can we talk about it, and like provide resources and offer like really practical things, right? Like, so it's one thing for someone to come up and say, I have the gift of teaching, can you give me an opportunity? That might be hard, but like, hey, can I pull a small group of women together and lead them through something? I'd be like, oh yes, please do that. So providing like actual practical things for me to think through would be helpful. If it gets to a point where you're just running into a wall, then that would be a conversation, and maybe talk to some people you trust, pray through it.
Mm.
But there'd be a few things I would do first, for sure.
Yeah.
I run a network for the women's ministry leaders within the GCC, and apart from a couple of us, most are volunteers.
Mhm.
Because a lot of women at position aren't paid staff members, right? So from a man's perspective, how does
I have to answer first.
how does a woman volunteer who may have another job,
Mhm.
isn't working 9 to 5, how do they kind of get that relationship that they need to have with the pastors in the church? Like, what are some helpful things for them?
If they're too busy, or
No, I'm saying like a lot of them.
They're not
are
there every day,
isolated, They're
yeah.
not there every day, they're not a paid staff.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
it's different when you're paid staff, right?
100%, yeah.
And I think that's the way it is for a lot of women's ministry leaders.
Yeah, which again is why this can't be like, there was a couple times as we were preparing this, I was like, I feel weird because I feel like I'm talking to the wrong audience sometimes, because there's a lot of churches that need to figure this out. So some of those churches, some of your churches, may need to figure out some systems and have that conversation. And again, they might not know that they're missing something, so that might need to be brought up to them in a kind and gracious way. But I would say, I would, again, ask for some kind of regular meeting, once a month, once every other month, where that male leader or a team of male leaders can meet with the volunteer to be, they should be aware of what's going on, and you need to build some of that relationship. So I would say it needs to be established, and that regular communication needs to happen. Even if there's volunteers, like I have to work some nights during the week. I don't work just 9 to 5 every day. So I need to be flexible enough to meet with my volunteers, especially if I've trusted them with that leadership role over a significant portion of church. And so I think it's trying to establish that. How are we going to have this regular communication? And let's make sure it's booked in and happening regularly. And then I do think there's room to have conversations with some churches. Some churches aren't going to have a big staff, some are. But I was just listening to a podcast on the way here where Michael Kruger was talking about when he's teaching guys and training pastors in seminary, one of the things he says is one of your first hires, if you're able to do it, should be a woman. That way you're getting that perspective in and you're providing that opportunity. And so it's a larger conversation than just this room. But I would say the first thing I'd say to those volunteers is keep knocking on the door till they answer and say, we need to meet every other month or something at least so that we can talk and work together on this. Because I'm called to oversee the ministry happening in my church. Oversight isn't here, you go do it and I'll see you at the end of the year, right? So that conversation I think needs to happen. Any other questions?
Just going back to the diagram that you had and the complementarian.
The spectrum?
The spectrum. So within the spectrum, you have like the soft and the hard, and that's the composition of it. So within a church, and to your point, right, there are so many people who are either on closer to the soft side or to the hard side. When you have to either lead ministries or bring in a woman's perspective, it's sometimes easier to have that conversation with the deacons and with the elders. But when it comes to how do you bring your church into that, the congregation for that part, how do you bring them to a more, like a commonality? Sometimes in terms of conversation, in terms of mindset, I think that's a struggle that, I think we've seen in different places to just how do we bring that to a better point? Because sometimes you'd have ministries which run really well because there is definitely a more stronger group of people who are like, okay, we can support them. But then there are some which don't, which just kind of dwindle just because of the mindset which is there. So is there any examples that you would have or situations where
To
you
help
saw that?
the church become more united around a common vision on this issue. It's hard, like I think of a situation where one of the women came up with all sorts of resources on the topic and wanted to explore in her own church, and then sat down with the elders and said, like, it's not clear. She had some leadership role in the church too. It's not clear for the women, and can we clarify? Because the lack of clarity creates this gap of potential where maybe in the elder's mind, yeah, we're complementarian and we stand, let's say, right here or right here, but so a woman, we still believe that a woman can do all of this, but they're only expressing maybe this much. And women just tend to generally, it's a generalization, not everyone, but do less than what they, because they're afraid of crossing boundaries, so they end up doing just this much, and there's this whole gap of potential that the elders would be very comfortable with in the church that is not happening, not because they're against it, just because they're not clear about it. So this woman was encouraging the elders to like, can we clarify? Can we have a position in the church? And then the elders were like, oh dear. But then, handing them a book, do you want to read about it? I want to understand your perspective. And finally one of the elders just looked through the book quickly, and then they realized, okay, there's several people in the church that are asking these questions. Okay, we have to sit down and actually do the work and write out, clarification. And then in between the elders, they realized that they weren't completely on the same side. So it's not perfect. But the conversation has begun to help create a more alignment. Then they created this document, say, okay, here's our position, done. Whew, now we can stop thinking about it and work on other things. I'm like, well, no, because lots of people in the church still don't know about this document that exists. It's hidden in some file somewhere. Oh, okay, we have to talk about it again? Yes. So just being that advocate of like, yeah, the conversation's not over, but doing it gently, doing it kindly with like, we want answers not because we don't trust you or we're against you, but we want to better work together, because when things are not clear, when things are not specified, well, we can be in this gray zone where we end up not serving as well. And helping them see, well, the goal is we want to serve together, and we want half of the church to be mobilized to use their gifts for the well-being of the church. How do we do this? If they don't know that they have all these opportunities, because it's just not explicitly said. What we mostly hear is what women can do, not all that women can, what they can't do, but all what they can do. We need to hear these things explicit. Really? I thought it was just going to be simpler if I just said what they can't do. Might be simpler, but it's more encouraging and opens up the door for women to think, oh, really? I can do that? Oh, I can also do that? So naming these things, giving examples of your own, how you're experimenting it, how other women are experimenting it, giving the benefit of the doubt that they're not trying to be unclear, they just don't know, it's a blind spot. And keep prodding on along the way and saying, I crave for us to be united around this, but we're not, so how do we work towards this? Can we have a series of sermons on this, Oh, really? yeah, we're many women who would love to hear that, and men too. Oh, really? Sometimes they just don't know, but it's I feel you, it's not easy. It's worth persevering though, in communicating and keep giving that chance to better understand one another. I don't know if that.
Yes, it is. Well, I wanted to hear your perspective.
I mean, I would agree. I would say ask your leadership to say, can we preach a series on this, or can we the document is a really great idea, and there's a podcast by Jen Wilkin as she goes through what her church did in that process, which is great. An episode, and then can we talk about this? Can we do a special class? Can we do a workshop? Can we bring someone in? And I think just reminding people that complementarianism is a lot more difficult for people to understand now than it ever has been before. I didn't grow up in the church. I was saved in high school, so early 2000s. I had no idea what any of this was, and for people to come and be like, it's a beautiful thing, I was like, it doesn't sound like it. So we actually need to teach it, because I think we're past the time in our culture where it makes sense and people understand it. So say, hey, we need some clarity, and where does our church fall here? That needs to be discussed, so yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for being here.